I'm Jim Csek. You're watching Colona Now. Live on the phone with me is Ian Burns, our managing editor, all the way out there in Ottawa. We missed Friday. I was under the weather, feeling much better today. Sorry about that, Ian.
Don't worry, mate.
On our first story today, I think is Ian turned up there a bit. Trudeau says his team made some mistakes on immigration, and we have a little clip to play there from Trudeau's ex there to play.
Let's talk about it. In the last 2 years, our population has grown really fast, like baby boom fast. And increasingly, bad actors like fake colleges and big chain corporations have been exploiting our immigration system for their own interests. So we're doing something major. We're reducing the numbers of immigrants that will come to Canada for the next 3 years. Today, I'm going to let you in on what happened, where we made some mistakes, and why we're taking this big turn.
I gotta say that's the first for me to hear him actually admit to making a mistake.
Well, if you watch the whole thing, it's very interesting because he uses his favorite pronoun when it comes to mistakes, which is we. So he talks about how his team made a lot of mistakes. But it's also quite interesting how he concentrates a lot more on, sinister external forces like these colleges and all the rest of it, rather than the laws that were in place that allowed them to flourish. But it is interesting. It's very hard for a politician to admit to making a mistake, isn't it? It's something that they rarely do, and that's for a reason. So I suppose at least he's done that.
Well, it is a big concern for Canadians, especially when it comes to housing and it comes to health, right? Both very stressed resources in Canada.
Yeah, and I think it's very unusual for like the population grew by something like 3.1%, didn't it, in 2022? That's extraordinarily unusual, even throughout history. Even if you look at like the Industrial Revolution, you look at things like when populations were really exploding in the 19th century, early 20th century, it's still rare to see that kind of increase in growth. So, I mean, it's not just infrastructure, it's also questions of culture and things like that have emerged, haven't they? And it's very hard to absorb that many people. And I think he's finally latched onto that, and now he's quite contrite.
The only scary part in all this is that the pressure that might be coming from the United States in this, supposed mass deportation plan from the Trump administration. And it sounds like, I mean, they've kind of like tempered it a bit. It sounds like they're going to target people that are dangerous first. And then that might not be great for Canada if the more dangerous ones flees to Canada first.
Yeah, and the story that we covered last week, that we talked about last week, one of the immigration lawyers in that story was saying they are going to be the first. They're going to be the canary in the coal mine. These people who have, I mean, it's terrible. These people who are actual criminals, they're going to look to Canada as, or so he thinks, as second best choice, and that is quite concerning.
Well, I mean, that seems like common sense. Like if you're either going to get deported or you're going to run, where would you run to, right? So.
But then, and there's also the question, which is very important. This also applies to the US, which is all this talk about, Mark Miller and Justin Trudeau a few weeks ago, they came out and they said, this is how many people we're going to have in, this is what's going to happen to our population, and then mapped it out over the next couple of years. But then the question is, how likely is that actually to be done? When you think about how many millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people we're talking about here, who says they're going to leave? And if they don't leave, who's going to make them? These are quite tough questions, and I'm not sure we've had an answer to them.
Well, we have Sean Fraser on today at 2:30, so that'll be interesting. We get to talk to him, the housing minister.
Yeah, maybe he'll explain. Former immigration minister as well.
Yeah, so he's covered up both ends of that. And then in our second topic there, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau defending the carbon tax on the world stage as he's down there at that meeting. And he's saying that it's, propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, and flat out lies that have been, attacking his carbon tax policies.
Well, like we just said there, very, very rare for a politician to admit a mistake. And this is an area where he refuses to accept that it's a mistake, even though Canada is very much an outlier as it stands now in the world. He refuses to accept. And it was actually on housing anyway. If you remember, cast your mind back, it was it was actually quite similar on that, where he refused to accept for a long time that that was a federal responsibility, whereas now he fully accepts that, and he's got all of these schemes for housing. But with carbon tax, yeah, the excuses are usually, it usually relies on that, doesn't it? That it's fake news, basically, that's misinformation.
Yeah, especially with the new incoming administration in the United States, it's going to be tough to defend the carbon tax when the United States is going to be moving into full bore um, oil and gas and LNG and everything else, right? Fracking.
Yeah, and I think as Canadians become more aware of declining GDP per capita and a generally pretty slow economy, they're gonna ask questions about things like oil and gas, which is ultimately Canada's most important breadwinner. It's the most important earner for the country.
Sounds like Danielle Smith's got her ticket for the Trump inauguration. She's going to be there, so maybe she's going to be talking Keystone Pipeline. Who knows?
Yeah, that's a very interesting one. I'm sure she'll be attacked for even speaking to him by the NDP in Alberta, but
Well,
probably quite important that she does speak to him.
she's making sure she's getting a plate at the table or whatever. So she said some pretty, I guess, damning things about the current environment minister as well, and says that like it's yeah. There's a lot of stuff that she's I mean she's got an Alberta first policy going on, and this one strikes
Yeah.
me as completely weird. The outgoing President Biden gives Ukraine permission now to use long-range missiles to attack Russia, which is Russia has said repeatedly that would be basically an improvisation of war with NATO. It seems odd that you would give that just as you were leaving.
Yeah, it is a very interesting and quite sort of scary event. But Ukraine, they've been asking for this for I think probably since the beginning of the war. Really, they've been asking for this kind of thing,
Well, I mean,
just
they
like
would
they've been
like nothing
asking
more than
for
to
a
drag NATO into the war. Um,
well,
but
and that
like,
was also they also asked for a no-fly zone, didn't they? Which would have had the same
right?
result, probably would have drawn NATO into it. But yeah, it is quite frightening. But then on what the Americans says, you Russia has actually escalated because they've invited another power, North Korea,
Mm.
to put soldiers on the front line, which is quite extraordinary as well. So
Yeah,
this war just keeps escalating really
yeah,
from both sides.
which kind of really puts Trump's promise of ending this war before he takes office into question.
Yeah, well, I don't really like nobody knows what he's thinking today because he said that that's part of the point is that he's not going to tell you. He's not going to say what he's going to do because he wants it to. He thinks that that would make it ineffective if they knew what was coming. But
Yeah.
it's also quite convenient when you don't have to explain how you're going to solve something that everybody else in the world can't solve.
Yeah, and then Germans told they can't take wealth for granted as economy faces formidable crash, and their auto industry is in real tough shape, right? Like Volkswagen is in really closing factories. It's like it's been really tough for a lot of the German automakers. A lot of that is loss of market share in China, which is mostly switching to EVs, and they just don't have any products that compete with the Chinese yet or Tesla.
Yeah, and well, China's economy is slowing down as well, isn't it? Sort of independently of everything else that's going on. But yeah, they used to buy all the German cars, and that was kind of that was their business model, wasn't it, to an extent, the
Yeah.
Germans. But now the Chinese, as has been the case in every other industry just about, they have their own ambitions. They want to produce their own cars, so that leaves less demand for
Yeah, and
German
then they put
cars.
some tariffs on, and of course there's a tariff war, and then the other big problem is that they're running short of young people. I mean, we've had this move in across the Western worlds where a lot of young people have been told not to have more children, and then two, they can't afford to have children.
Yeah, and Germany's really suffered in that department. I mean, they have, if you look at their demographic, you can look at charts and things. They're at the worst sort of end, at the lower end. But they're quite similar to Canada, though. I should say we're also not particularly healthy in demographics. But the Germans, yeah, I mean, it's very tough for the Germans. given the nature of their economy, that they're big manufacturers. You need people to manufacture things until Optimus comes around or whatever. So it is quite bleak for Germany.
I understand Denmark has made a change in that, and they're really promoting the growth of young families.
Yeah, and well, there's only one Western country, or there's only one country in the world that you could call Western that actually has functional birth rates, and that's Israel, which is very interesting because the Israeli economy is tight. It's very hard to live in Israel. It's a very small country. Obviously, it's at war more often than not, but they figured it out, and it's kind of yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people have tried, like the French and the Russians, obviously, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult to increase birth rates. So we're just going to have to see what happens with these schemes.
And then, does cable exist anymore when you have like Netflix, record-breaking $60 million people tune in for that Tyson fight?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, and it wasn't pay-per-view either, which usually a big fight like that would cost
yeah.
you like 20, 30, whatever dollars on top of your cable subscription, wouldn't it? But yeah, it's true. I mean, they can't compete with that kind of thing, can they?
And do you still have cable at home?
No, I do
No,
not.
I do not either. Yeah, I mean, you get almost everything you want off of a smart TV, right? Any streaming you kind of want. So it's tough to justify paying
Yeah.
that large amount for cable when you can get more content on these different streaming platforms, and plus just on YouTube or X or anything like that. X is now a lot of stuff on X too, right?
Yeah. Though I would say, the thing that turned a lot of people off cable was the constant ads, wasn't it? Because it's like you're trying to sit down and watch a movie or something like that, and it's like 20, 30 ads. But
I think
now
I think
Disney
for
has
me
started
what
to
the
do that, haven't they?
problem was when there was like 250 channels and you surfed through the 250 channels and you could only find like 3 that were worth like surfing through.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But
That
it
was
took you an hour and a half to surf through all those channels, and you're just like, what is going on? And then of course all the ads, right?
yeah. And it was quite annoying, wasn't it? You do that, and then you'd end up watching kind of like a Harrison Ford film from the 90s that you'd seen 100 times or something
Yeah.
from like halfway through. It wasn't a very sensible way to do things, was it?
And the TV guide that they supposedly made it easy made it extremely difficult to kind of like do anything with, right? Like I just, and then plus it was very expensive, right, for what you got.
Totally. Yeah. And then you had to pay extra for things like sports,
And you
obviously
had to buy
things
a
like a
package, right? Like
boxing
if you
match.
wanted like the one sports channel, you had to buy like 16 other channels and then 2 other packages. And
Yeah. Although it is superior now, I think, with the streaming services, but it's also now that they diversify a lot more, you kind of find yourself in a position where you have to get several if you want to have full coverage, which is,
I
takes
mean,
you
I
back to
find
the
I
cable
mostly
days in
watch
terms of
YouTube and
price.
X now, and I very little even on the Netflix and the streaming platforms as well. So there you go. And in British Columbia, EB's set to name his cabinet today with his 1-seat slim majority government.
Yeah, and he's going to be without a lot of his old veterans like Rob Fleming and George Herman, people like that who are gone. He's going to have to find some new people to come in.
And word is that Adrian Dix may be moving on as from health minister. The never do an interview Adrian Dix.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of those big ones, a lot of the big dogs retired, didn't they? But Dix, he's almost like the biggest of the big dogs, isn't he? And he's still there. So I assume he's still going to be in the cabinet. It's just where's he going to go? But I suppose when you have so much of a reputation as he does, and you're such a huge figure in BC politics, kind of expect a big job, you know?
Yeah. Well, where do they need somebody that won't talk to the media? Which department should he be running?
It's going to be very interesting to follow and see what that is. Yeah.
Interesting. You had a chat with Canada Post.
Yeah, they and I also reached out to speak to the union that represents most of the workers. Yeah, it's a very It's a very tough one. It's unusual, I think, because they're a crown corporation, they kind of speak differently. They behave differently. So it's very interesting to speak to them, and they just kind of out and out say, um, they basically say like, we're doing terribly. We're really suffering. Like, I don't know how we're going to make this work. You don't usually hear that from a company. So it's quite an interesting insight.
Basically, they laid out that they're not very competitive in their current structure.
Totally, yeah. Well, he was saying that they can't deliver at weekends because they have to give their employees double time. So it's just impossible to compete with, most of them are American, aren't they, the rivals? And they just
Yeah,
can't compete
FedEx,
with those.
UPS, the big ones, right?
Yeah. And then lots of other problems that they have. But basically what he said was they just can't commit to long-term liabilities in the form of everything that the unions have demanded, like more pay and improved benefits and so on. But they're at an impasse, aren't they? I don't think there's any word that they're closer to a deal. I know the federal government is very deeply involved.
And you've reached out to the union and have not heard back yet?
I have heard back, but I'm yet to have a comment from them. But I just gave them the right of reply, essentially, because they've been quite communicative. They've revealed all of their demands. They're very open about that stuff. But I was interested in seeing what they thought of some of the claims from Canada Post. Yeah.
And then some good news. Big White opens early. They're opening this weekend, or November 22nd.
That is good news, yeah.
Yeah, so you can get up there, and I think to celebrate the early start, they're going to lift tickets will be half price on opening day and until further notice, because it was originally set to open on November 28th. So you can see even in the Okanagan here in our background shot here of our live shot that the snow, the bathtub ring is kind of creeping down about halfway to the Okanagan Valley here. In the Colona Market, sales had a bit of bump there in October. If you look at that little orange marker there, we had a bit of a bump, and that could be due to, this is from Colin Krieg's Remax report, that half-point cut there, or, September was pretty bad. He's not expecting good numbers for November, though, so he thinks maybe that was just a blip for October, and then maybe a stronger spring, but, although that is a better sign, we did see some activity back in October in sales.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting chart, that, isn't it? When you look at 2021, just towers over the rest.
Yeah. And then in one of the questions that somebody, President Trump's thrown out some tax cuts in the United States, and then somebody asked Pierre Poilievre if he would consider some of those tax cuts, and one of them is no taxes on overtime, which I think would encourage a lot of people to work overtime if there was no taxes on overtime. So here's his response to that.
I want to ask you a question. So I heard you saying about axing the tax and making life easier for Canadians. What do you think about Donald Trump? Like, he just mentioned that he's gonna take off the tax from overtime. So are you thinking something like that? Because a lot of Canadians are working like really hard, and they get a lot of tax taken from overtime. They're just doing overtime because it's very hard to afford. So are you thinking about that, like considering like overtime tax cutoff?
I'm open to it. I'm definitely open to it. We need a big tax cut to reduce, and particularly for people who are working overtime. Right now, people are, it was funny, it was at the Thunder Bay grain handling terminal, and the manager said, I gave everybody a bonus. I thought they'd be happy. Then the pay stubs went out for that year, for that month, and everyone was in my office saying, the government took it all.
Yeah.
It was, they got a bonus, so they move into a higher tax bracket. The government swoops in and takes the fruits of the workers' labor, and it takes from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. This is like a war on work that we have in this country. So I'm open to it. I'm going to study it, figure out how it would work, and how I want to make sure whatever we do doesn't cause more administrative and complexity, where people, have to say, well, this income was from regular hours, and that income was from overtime hours, and now you have to worry about auditors coming in and checking, which hours you were taxed at which rate. So we have to make sure that it doesn't end up creating too much complexity and so on.
There you go. I mean, I think that would be a welcome thing, less taxes on anything. But I think one of the things, it's a progressive tax rate in Canada. You don't actually move up into a bracket; it becomes more of an effective rate. But anytime that people can, if they work harder, they shouldn't be penalized more. I think it would be a welcome relief for many Canadians. And then with the payroll systems that most people have now, I don't think it would be that complex to put into it. They would just, in the overtime slot, they would just put zero taxation on that.
Yeah, it would certainly, you'd think, incentivize people to work a bit longer. But I mean, it's interesting that Pierre Poilievre there, he talks about complexity and how he wants to simplify things. But something that he doesn't mention is, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. It's what we were talking about earlier with Germany. There aren't enough taxpayers
Yeah.
to support all of the essentially older people, retirees who, you know, they account for something like 95% of all hospital expenditure, or whatever it is. I can't remember what the statistic is. Then there's pensions. They also have a huge electoral heft. So when they vote, they tend to vote for things like what the Bloc Québécois are trying to do, which is increase payments in pensions. But the reality is, to an extent, if and when he becomes prime minister, he's going to kind of have his hands tied, because there are certain expenditures that just can't really be changed because it's the people that don't work anymore, like older people. So I think the question about tax is it's a lot bigger than just what's been represented there, I think.
Yeah, I remember I was a mindset controller one time, and I had one guy there that worked. He was on flying in and out, and he was on a 6-week, 2-week rotation, and he would work all 6 weeks like steady. Like he would work like 72 days in a row, right? You know, like whatever that, 42 days in a row, and it would be tons of overtime, right? Like, and he would work 12-hour days. And most of his check was double time. And he would go into the lunchroom with his check, and he would drop it on the table for the other guys, and he'd go boom, because his check would be like 4 or 5 times larger than most everybody else. And then, of course, some of them would find their way into my office complaining about that guy's check and saying, like, how does he get to make so much money and they don't? And I said, you can have all the overtime you want. We need people to work overtime. And I said, you have a tough time just doing your 5 days in a row. Like, you miss one of your 5 days, right? But they wanted his check, but they didn't want to do the work that he was doing.
Yeah.
That's kind of the typical thing, right? Like, I'll take the check, but not the work, right? Anyway.
Well, there are many examples of that, aren't there, where a lot of people like to sit and say they want something that someone else has, but they're not willing to kill themselves with like 20-hour days and things like that. It's kind of the way it is.
Tesla stock on a big run again this morning, with word out that President-elect Donald Trump's team is signaling a green light on self-driving car rules as they, move to supercharge Tesla's robotaxi ambitions. So, and it could be an $11 trillion market opportunity by 2026, according to ARK Invest, right? So this could be huge. I mean, a big bet Elon Musk made on Trump that seems to be already paying some dividends.
I'm trying to think of when something like this has ever happened in history, where a businessman has been so close to, an incoming president. He's almost like number 2 or number 3 in the administration already, isn't it? It's kind of it's very, very interesting.
I don't know if you watched the UFC fight at all, or seen some of the highlights when Trump has always been a big fan of UFC, and he walked into the building with Dana White and the head of UFC, and of course in the entourage was Elon Musk, Vivek, Tulsi, RFK, and they even had a photo of them on the plane there with Stephen Johnson as well, all chowing down to McDonald's. And I even had to post that one on LinkedIn, because there's RFK there with a McDonald's burger and a Coca-Cola next to him, right? That this is supposedly the new the health minister, right?
Yeah. Well, if you zoom in on his face, he looks like he's just been kicked in the backside. He doesn't look very pleased.
He had to sit with the cool kids, and they're just like, you gotta eat it, man. And he's like, I can't do it. And they're just like, hey, you want to sit at the cool kids table, you gotta eat it.
Yeah, it's like an initiation rite or something.
But there's a lot of uproar out there about RFK being named or nominated for health. But there was some defense for him from the former CDC director, saying that he believes that he would make a good head of health, because he said he's not anti-vaccine. He's more about just he wants to see the data, right? So interesting to see how this all plays out.
I also think, you have to look at how things have been in recent years for the Americans. You've seen things like declining life expectancy and obesity rates that would once upon a time have been considered like unfathomable, like unimaginable levels of obesity. So it's not like things have been going well in America in that department, really. So I think that's why people are willing to turn to him and give him a chance.
Yeah, because I think they compared in that discussion, they compared the death rates in Taiwan versus America, and it was a huge difference. And they said it's mainly due to just the overall health of Americans.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty dire situation, really, especially for the richest country in the world. So
yeah, I think the food supply is definitely, like all the fast food and the liquid sugar drinks, and it just seems like, it's big business, right? And I'm pretty sure that's why a lot of those corporations don't want a guy like RFK in there. It's big business. You think of all the big fast food joints and corporations, and in the cereal industry. It's sugar and wheat, right? So.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of talk about oils and things. Apparently, he's very down on seed oils.
Yeah, just looking at the overall health, the obesity crisis in the United States, and something's wrong, right?
Yeah, well, it's like diabetes, heart disease. It's crazy when you look at the top killers in America, that you could link them all to diet, pretty much, couldn't you?
I changed my diet over the past 7 years and lost 50 pounds and kept it off, just basically changing what I eat, right? And it is so important in what you eat. And I had basically given up at that point, thinking that's just what it is, but it isn't if you just change what you eat. Yeah, and you don't have to diet; you just have to eat better, eat whole foods. And in the financial markets, gold on a tear again this morning, likely to do some of the political stuff going on out there, geopolitical stuff. So gold rebounding there from, like selling off a bit from since Trump was announced as the victor in the U.S. election. Bitcoin's still on that rip though. Bitcoin just tearing higher, and will it break the 100,000 mark in U.S. dollars? It's obviously broken that in Canadian dollars. We show you the Canadian amount there just so that you understand. You get $129,000 in Canadian. And the stock market higher this morning as well. You can go check those numbers, but definitely a Donald Trump trade there. Most of the market very friendly to the incoming presidential election. They see this as very positive. Anything else there you want to talk about this morning, Ian?
I think that we've just about done everything, haven't we? It's still snowy on the Coquihalla. That's maybe something to mention.
If we pull that graphic off there, we can give you the live cam view there, like a traffic flowing nice and easy through the center of Kelowna there on Highway 97, both east and west. We've got a beautiful backdrop there with a little bit of a snow bathtub ring there, coming about halfway down the mountain. So again, a good time if you don't have those winter tires on, even if you're just driving around in the city here. Good to have those once those roads become icy. You know what I mean? That one's stuck at the light there, spinning your tires. How are things looking in Ottawa? You getting snow yet?
There hasn't been any. No, it's this El Nino malarkey, I think, isn't it? It's messing things up. Or El Nina? I can't remember which one it is this year.
There you go. With that said, then we'll see you back here in a bit with we'll have Sean Fraser on at 2:15. Was that Ian? 2:15, I think, right?
That's right, yeah.
And we thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent.